Our blades are sharp. Since time immemorial, every northerner between neck and wall has learned to fear the name Bolton. Our Dreadfort has stood on the banks of the weeping water for thousands of years. Cold, unforgiving, its dungeons holding many a dark secret. Once our house rivaled the Starks of Winterfell. Our ancestors, the Red Kings, reigned supreme between White Knife and Last River, and burned Winterfell to the ground, not once, but twice. Our enemies knew our blades were sharp, and we never let them forget it. The Red Kings took the skin of their foes, proudly displaying this rightful trophy of the hunt. It is said the Dreadfort's dungeons still contain many a direwolf skin. But then the Andals came. We were forced to band together with the hated Starks to defeat the heathen invader. Together we drove back the Andal, and in fact took the fight to his lands. The rape of the three sisters lives on in the nightmares of Vailman, and Balthazar Bolton's pink pavilion, made of the flayed skins of 100 dead enemies, still haunts them to this day. In the centuries that followed, the Stark yoke fit ever more uncomfortably around Bolton necks. When the Dragon Lords arrived, the weak Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, gave up his lands without a fight. Typical Stark cowardice. What, I tell you, still binds our proud house to these weaklings after such a pathetic display? House Bolton would never have knelt. I wonder, can one flay a dragon? But even the days of the Targaryens are now coming to an end. The last dragon died 150 years ago, and while there are rumors of Targaryen children in the east, they are weak and Essos is far. The Andal boy king in the south has beheaded Eddard Stark, and most of his children are dead or missing. The Stark line is hanging by a thread, and such an opportunity to rid ourselves of the hated house has not presented itself in centuries. House Bolton will once again sharpen its blades, and this time none shall dare oppose us. After the beheading of Eddard Stark, his son Robb declared himself king in the north in a bout of typical Stark arrogance. But the move was a popular one in the north, and Lord Roose Bolton saw himself forced to go along with it for the time being. King Robb the Young Wolf appointed Lord Roose as his master of laws and made him a commander. When foolish King Balon Greyjoy of the Iron Islands invaded the north, Lord Roose proved his skill as a commander by driving back the Ironborn in the west and northwest. The legitimized bastard and heir to the Dreadfort, Ramsey Bolton, married Lady Branda Umber, daughter of Lord Greatjon Umber in these turbulent times. The Umbers of Last Hearth and the Boltons of the Dreadfort thus joined their houses, forming a powerful bloc in the northeast of Robb's kingdom. South of the Neck, the Andal infighting continued, as the mighty Lord Tywin Lannister was killed in personal combat while attempting to destroy the Brotherhood Without Banners, a now famous band of Riverlander raiders. It seems these proud Southron lords cannot even deal with simple bandits. Tywin was succeeded by his son, Tyrion Lannister, who refused to aid his boy king Joffrey in fighting the Northerners, and exiled his incestuous siblings. Through dumb luck, King Robb the Young Wolf had lost his most powerful adversary, and now turned his attention to the Ironborn invaders. He did not have much choice in the matter in any case. King Robb refused to marry Roslyn, the daughter of Lord Walder Frey of the Twins, and so the Northern Army was not allowed to pass over the bridge and into the Riverlands. The stubborn act of misplaced honor might well have cost Robb the war, were it not for the Lannister neutrality. But King's Landing was too preoccupied to act on the mistake. King Robb was able to assemble a fleet large enough to transport a sizable army directly to the castle Pike on the Iron Islands, in a foolhardy, if admittedly daring move. His new wife, the beautiful lady Daisy Mormont, accompanied her husband on this adventure, crushing Ironborn skulls with her mace. It is difficult to blame boy King Joffrey and his court for not acting on Robb Stark's foolishness. Not only did the boy's uncle, Stannis Baratheon, continue his brutal campaign in the southern Crownlands to install himself on the Iron Throne. But in the east, the two Targaryen pretenders had joined forces and were now ready to attack King's Landing. Daenerys Targaryen, the Mad King's daughter, had married her supposed nephew, Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, and brought over an army of eunuchs, sellswords, and Dothraki savages, as well as 3 young dragons. The throne's weakness and the Targaryen invasion managed to bend the notoriously unbendable Stannis Baratheon. He sent Davos Seaworth to Robb's siege camp on the Iron Islands and brokered a deal with the young wolf. Robb was to yield all castles he held in the Crownlands and recognize Stannis Baratheon as king of the Iron Throne, and in return would be allowed to rule as independent king in the north for the time being. The deal was beneficial for both parties, and meant that Stannis was able to seize King's Landing, imprison the royal family, and proclaim himself king, while Robb was able to concentrate his forces on the Iron Islands, capturing Euron Greyjoy and ending the war, and shortly afterwards deal with the treacherous Freys. With the war against the Freys going on in the background, King Robb died suddenly, as did his successor, King Bran the Broken. Their deaths proved fertile ground for rumors, though most now agree it was stress and injury, rather than murder, that nearly wiped out the Starks. And so the war against the Freys was won by young Rickon Stark, a boy of 7. Well, a boy needs a regent. Perhaps this is an opportunity. In 302 AC, fortunes rose for House Bolton. The new king in the north, the young Rickon Stark, 7 years of age, needed a regent. Initially, the position was filled by Lord Galbert Glover of Deepwood Motte, but the Boltons immediately started plots to replace him. Rumor has it that Lord Roose challenged Glover to a duel for the regency. Lord Glover is said to have been content to return to his lordship rather than fight, paranoid, and probably for good reason, that Lord Roose would poison his blade if it came to a duel. Lord Glover thus chose to step down, and Lord Roose Bolton took on the most powerful position in the north as the new Lord Regent, taking King Rickon on as a ward. Lord Roose wasted no time in trying to use his new position as one of the most powerful lords on the continent to his advantage. He was not able to arrange a betrothal between King Rickon's heiress, Sansa Stark, and his grandson Jonel. However, when a trial by combat judged his first wife guilty of a plot to murder his bastard son Ramsey, Lord Roose used his new power to divorce her and secure a new match, suitable for his newfound power and prestige. His eye fell on the comely Margaery Tyrell. Although still married to the deposed boy King Joffrey, the Lannister boy was not popular, and a convenient carriage accident befell him later that year. After negotiations with Lord Paramount Mace Tyrell of the Reach, an agreement was reached. Lady Margaery would marry Lord Roose, 20 years her senior, concluding a powerful alliance between the Dreadfort and Highgarden. As Bolton power grew in the north, the situation south of the Neck did not calm down at all, even after King Stannis' initial victory over the Targaryen invaders. Oraine Waters, the bastard of Driftmark, who had stolen the royal fleet under the regency of King Joffrey, had gathered an army of opportunists to seize control of his ancestral homeland, the islands of Driftmark and Dragonstone in Blackwater Bay. The brash adventurer did not succeed in this mad scheme, but yet another dangerous invasion did not endear King Stannis to the people. Desperate for a victory, the king decided to attack the north, but in an uncharacteristic move had underestimated his enemy. Winterfell had been at peace for some time, and its levies had had time to heal, while the Iron Throne had been on a constant invasion. Lord Regent Roose led his king's army to victory at Sow's Horn, weakening the forces of the Iron Throne to such an extent that all of King Stannis' enemies returned. Lord Paramount Tyrion Lannister had remained neutral in all of his new liege's wars, and had been consolidating his power over the Westerlands. Now that the Westerlander armies outnumbered the crown itself, he decided to make a bout for full independence, declaring himself King of the Rock. The Targaryens, Daenerys and Aegon also returned to Westeros, trying once again to oust the Baratheon usurpers. It seemed King Stannis' days were numbered. 306 AC became known as the last year of the reign of Stannis Baratheon. The stubborn, fire-worshipping king was fighting wars in the north, on the Iron Islands in the Westerlands, and most importantly, in the direct neighborhood of King's Landing itself. Almost all of his vassals had abandoned him. Not one Lord Paramount had answered Stannis' call. Casterly Rock was fighting for its independence, Lord Robert of the Vale had joined the Targaryen cause, and Dorne and the Reach had remained neutral. It came as no surprise then when the ragtag army of Aegon Targaryen broke through the gates of King's Landing in early 306. Stannis, having fought to the end, surrendered his crown in the Red Keep, and the reign of Aegon VI could begin. In the north, Lord Regent Roose Bolton was now confident and secure in his position as Warden of the North. When the regent's friend was murdered by the Queen Mother herself, Catelyn Tully, Lord Roose did not concern himself with the emotions of his liege and ward, King Rickon. Though he kept a sheen of plausible deniability, it was a public secret that he had Lady Catelyn murdered months after his friend's death. The grief-stricken Rickon's erratic behavior after the death of his mother was used as an excuse by Lord Roose to declare his young liege insane. In 308 AC, the Stark boy was locked up in the hastily restored First Keep of Winterfell. For years, nobody but the Lord Regent himself and a select group of servants were allowed to see the king, and Rickon reached adulthood in isolation, while his regent continued to rule in his name. Lord Roose was already called the usurper by some, though he was careful to act in Rickon's name only. The later years of King Rickon's childhood also saw the return of Howland Reed, the mysterious lord of Greywater Watch. In early 308 AC, he rose to glory by winning a grand melee. Later that year, he helped Lord Roose in getting rid of the one person who could stand in the way of Bolton Regency, Lady Sansa Stark. Lord Howland brought a venomous snake from his marshy homeland, which successfully poisoned the young lady, eliminating one more rival to the throne in Winterfell. But Howland Reed's fame was cemented most of all during the short-lived invasion of the North in 310 AC, when Aegon Targaryen tried to reconquer his lost kingdoms. At Last River, not far from the Dreadfort itself, Lord Howland led a battle against an expeditionary force led by King Aegon VI himself. As he had done 27 years ago at the Tower of Joy, Howland once again won an epic duel against a legendary foe. It was not Arthur Dayne this time, but the king himself. Lightly armored and quick on his feet, the Lord of Greywater Watch avoided Aegon's Kingsguard and pierced a weak spot in the royal armor. King Aegon died on the spot. Howland Reed had single-handedly saved the North from subjugation, but he had done more than that. King Aegon was succeeded by his 6-year-old daughter, who served R'hllor and surrounded herself with fellow fire worshippers. The Lords Paramount had now gone through 12 years of war and bloodshed, and now that they sensed weakness, they decided to pounce. The Lannisters of the Westerlands, the Tyrells of the Reach, and the Arryns of the Vale, led by the ambitious upstart Earls of the Stormlands, together presented an ultimatum to the crown. Lord Regent Gilbert Ferring knew he could never hope to defeat 4 Lords Paramount with only the questionable support of Dorne, and accepted the ultimatum. For the first time in 300 years, 6 of the 7 kingdoms were now independent. Lord Roose's regency continued into the 310s AC. According to the rumors, he had the last legitimate Stark, Jorah, son of Sansa, murdered, leaving only Rickon, the last of the Starks, who was locked in a padded cell. Roose also arranged a double marriage pact between boy king Kevan of the Rock and his daughter Olenna Bolton. The Bolton grip on the Northern Kingdom had never seemed so secure, but appearances can be deceiving. In the case of Queen Rhaella Targaryen of the Iron Throne, however, appearances were not deceiving. The girl had already lost most of her realm due to weakness and hatred, and now, after a brief coup d'etat, she lost the rest of it. The throne was seized by Edric Storm, calling himself Edric's Shield, the bastard son of King Robert Baratheon, and the Targaryens were once again scattered to the winds. Despite King Edric's illegitimacy, he had the support of the small folk, who longed for the days of good King Robert, and many a lord admired his skill with a warhammer, as well as his easy charm. Not long after his ascension, Edric even managed to reconquer his family's ancestral kingdom, the Stormlands, from the upstart house Errol. In 313 AC, Lord Roose Bolton, the Lord Regent of the North, died at 58 after 11 years of regency in the north. The Leech Lord had grown fat in his old age and had suffered from increasing paranoia. The fate of King Rickon eventually turned. While he was not immediately released, he was eventually allowed to leave his captivity and rule the north in his own right, without a regent, blocking this road to power for House Bolton indefinitely. The cold and cruel Lord Roose had not been loved in the realm, but his deranged, psychopath son and heir was hated even more. Lord Ramsey, the new Lord of the Dreadfort, started his reign ominously by raising taxes to an obscene degree to pay for his father's extravagant funeral. After that, many terrible stories were told about what was going on at the Dreadfort. Tales of hunting and mutilating peasant women, castrating and blinding vassal lords for minor infractions, and poisoning his blade during the Umber melee of 316 AC, murdering his opponents even after they yielded. It really was possible. The new Lord of the Dreadfort was worse than the old one. Ambitious, ruthless and deceitful, Lord Ramsey Bolton of the Dreadfort set about trying to regain his father's glory, the only way he knew how, through reckless cruelty. In 316 AC, 20 good Bolton men ambushed King Rickon's carriage, and before anyone knew what was happening, the young monarch was dragged to the Dreadfort dungeons. Ramsey sent a pink letter to all northern lords. In it, he claimed to simply continue the good work of his father in protecting the realm from a mad king, and demanded the royal regency, proclaiming it his birthright. But the lords of the north did not bend to this act of insanity. In response, Ramsey sent each of them a finger bone from King Rickon's right hand, saying that the bones would continue to come until his demands were met. The realm teetered on the brink of civil war for months, until Ramsey's rival and Rickon's spymaster, Lady Winifred Manderley of White Harbour, managed to successfully break her king out of prison. Once recovered from his festering injuries, King Rickon was out for revenge. But Lord Ramsey was not so easy to deal with. The shrewd marriage pact his father had forged with the Lannisters of the Rock was strengthened by a marriage between Ramsey's daughter Rhea and Prince Marwyn, son of Harold Arryn of the Vale. Much as he would have liked to imprison Ramsey for treason, King Rickon was forced to contend with the basic math of the diplomatic reality. If he assaulted the Dreadfort, it would be 2 kings against 1. Knowing he was in a position of strength, and perhaps understanding that with so many enemies, his time on this earth was probably limited, Ramsey decided on a final act of lunacy. With the eyes of the realm upon him, he declared war on the Lord Wayne Woolfield of the Broken Branch. Lord Ramsey claimed that as the heir to the Red Kings of old, the High Lordship rightfully belonged to the Boltons, and he raised his 6,000 levies. The war was won for the Boltons after a bloody and decisive victory at Overton. However, victorious Lord Ramsey the Ruthless continued to chase down the fleeing soldiers to the Hornwood. As he watched his dogs tear a soldier apart, he was shot with an arrow by Lord Wayne of the Broken Branch himself. He is said to have died in a fit of maniacal laughter at the bloody spectacle. The realm breathed a sigh of relief. John L. Bolton was an altogether more pleasant man than his father and grandfather had been. Peasant and lord alike found him kind and easy to persuade, and the lord was quick with his money and honourable in his exaction of justice. Still, the stained reputation of his predecessors would take some time to heal, especially in the recently conquered lands of the Broken Branch. An incident in an Overton tavern even cost the new lord an eye. King Rickon, who had lost a hand in Ramsey's dungeon, still begrudgingly extended an olive branch by offering Lord Jono a position in his council, although not a position of any consequence yet. The Boltons were simply too powerful to ignore. The king also appointed Lord Jono commander in his war to reclaim his ancestral sword from the Lannisters of the Rock. King Kevin Lannister had been fighting wars on many fronts, including against King Edric of the Iron Throne, and King Rickon saw an opportunity to press this advantage. The campaigns in the Westerlands saw a decent performance by Lord Jonel, who befriended Benfred Tolhard, Lord of Torrhen Square in the Northern Army camp. However, they were a disaster for the North. Not because the Northern armies weren't victorious. The Lannister forts fell quickly, and the Sword Ice was returned in a humiliating ceremony in 322 AC. No, it was because in taking his armies so far south, King Rickon had neglected his eastern flank. With the depleted garrisons and levies in the Riverlands, King Harold Arryn of the Vale saw a golden opportunity. With his famous knights, he moved in and enforced the fealty of the Steward of the Trident, Lady Paramount Barbara Bracken. King Rickon had gained the sword, but lost his mother's kingdom. King Edric Baratheon of the Iron Throne, meanwhile, had profited from the many-pronged attack on the Kingdom of the Rock. He had managed to imprison King Kevin Lannister, and had forced him to swear fealty to the Iron Throne, as it was before the War of the Five Kings. With the Stormlands and Dorne already his vassals, 3 of the 7 kingdoms now answered to King's Landing again. Would King Edric be able to restore his father's realm? The mid-320s AC were an interesting time for Jonel Bolton at the court of King Rickon. Lord Bolton served as an advisor on the King's Council, as did his close friend, Master of Laws Benfred Tolhard. But also serving on the King's Council were Spymaster Winifred Manderly, the Boltons' most powerful and hated rival ruler in the north, and Jonel's great-uncle, Master of Coin Donal Bolton, who had resented Jonel's line ever since he, the oldest legitimate son of Lord Roose III, was passed over in the succession by Roose's bastard son Ramsey. The King's Council was thus starkly divided in 2 factions, each vying for control over the other, and each knowing there would be no mercy if the other prevailed. The first move in this giant game of chess was made by the Donal Mannerly faction. Donal's wife, Meline, murdered Lord Jonel's sister Rhea, thus weakening Ramsey's line and depriving his great-nephew of an opportunity for a marriage alliance. Furious Lord Jonel's counter-move was nothing short of a full-on invasion of Lady Mannerly's capital, White Harbor, reusing his father's tenuous claim that the land belonged to the Red Kings of old and thus to the Boltons. But in his anger, Lord Jonel made a fatal mistake. Following the old northern tradition that he who passes the sentence must swing the sword, the terrible one-eyed swordsman decided to lead his army himself. In a manner similar to his father, he won the war in 2 all-out battles at Ramsgate and Blackpool, but Lady Winifred Manderly had the last laugh. During the Battle of Blackpool, she sent out some of her men to explicitly try to kill Lord Jonel on the field. One was able to stab the Lord in the stomach, rendering him incapable, and the second finished the job. Lord Jonel, the first decent Bolton to rule the Dreadfort in generations, died right then and there, together with mother Branda Umber, who had defended her son to the last. Lord Jonel was succeeded by his newborn infant son, Roose. Jonel's widow, Myrcella Hill, bastard daughter of Tyrion Lannister and half-sister of Kevin Lannister, both late Kings of the Rock, ruled as regent in her son's place. Despite hailing from halfway across the continent, Lady Myrcella was more of a Bolton than Jonel ever was. A brilliant schemer and diplomat, Myrcella was ruthless, cruel and paranoid. The Donal Mannerly faction had perhaps hoped to weaken Bolton rule by killing Lord Jonel, but they had accomplished the opposite. Pliable and just Lord Jonel had been replaced by Lord Roose with teeth, and Lady Mannerly had lost her capital and most of her levy, definitively ending any military threat she might have posed to the Boltons. The south was no less eventful. Lord Paramount Kevin Lannister died shortly after his subjugation by King Edric Baratheon, and was succeeded by his aunt, none other than former Queen of the Iron Throne, Cersei Lannister. Almost immediately she declared war on King Rickon to undo the humiliation done to her nephew. Sir Quentyn Martell, meanwhile, declared a war to claim the Iron Throne in the name of his aunt Ilea and her Targaryen children. King Edric Baratheon, however, died only months into this war in a drunken stupor. He left the realm to his son Boromund Baratheon, a rather unremarkable man who nevertheless was not popular due to his worship of the foreign Red God. King Rickon too saw a claimant trying to claim his throne. Lady Alice Stark, the daughter of Rickard Karstark of Karholt, had gathered a modest army and had declared war on her distant cousin. Lady Regent Myrcella of the Dreadfort decided to support King Rickon in this war. Alice Stark was the mother of the former Lord of the Broken Branch after all, and a successful invasion would give this unruly Bolton vassal way too much power, spelling disaster for the stability of the Bolton lands. There was another, even more far-fetched claimant. The blue-haired matron Bria Adaris of Tyrosh saw the instability in the north and decided to cross the narrow sea to make a blatant, unwarranted power grab. With 3 wars now ongoing, would King Rickon survive? Lady Regent Myrcella was terrified that her son Roose would meet the same fate as her husband and father-in-law, death on the battlefield. To soothe her fears, she invited the legendary fighter John Massey from the Stormlands to guard, train, and educate her son. She herself would raise Roose's sister, Branda, hoping to teach her daughter the subtle arts of subterfuge and manipulation. Lady Myrcella next set about finding a good strategic match for her daughter. The lady's skills in court diplomacy and unmatched ruthlessness in the subsequent negotiations soon secured a match between Branda and Prince Marwyn Arryn, heir to the Kingdom of Mountain and Vale, one of the strongest powers on Westeros. But she didn't just secure a marriage, she also got the groom's father, King Harold, to agree that any children the marriage produced would bear the Bolton name. This was a leap in the prestige of the Boltons, not seen since Lord Roose III's marriage to Marjorie Tyrell. But Myrcella didn't end there. She also arranged a marriage for little Lord Roose himself, and to none other than Princess Alysanne Stark, the daughter of King Rickon. The Donnell Manderley faction had been quiet since the Bolton conquest of White Harbour. Despite their expectations, Lady Regent Myrcella had kept her late husband's lands in one piece. What was worse, by 328 AC, King Rickon decided to return Moat Cailin to the crown. Sir Donald Bolton, Rickon's rival and great-uncle, had lost his power base and became landless. The threat of usurpation, for all intents and purposes, was over. Donnell even lost his wife, Meline. It came as a shock, then, when in early 329 AC, Donnell arrived at the gates of the Dreadfort itself and asked for an audience. The only one who did not seem surprised was Lady Regent Myrcella Hill. After some rather titillating conversation between Donnell and Myrcella, both attractive, charismatic people in their late 20s, the two retired to a private room with just a single scribe to accompany them. When they came out, they were holding hands and giving each other sultry looks, and Lady Myrcella made an announcement that shocked the court even more. She would marry Donnell Bolton and appoint him her hand. Only days after the wedding ceremony, Lord Roose's aunt and Lady Myrcella's sister-in-law, Branna Bolton, died in her sleep. She had been the only one standing in between Jonel's children and Donnell in the line of succession, and many whispered that her murder had been part of the mysterious marriage contract between Myrcella and Donnell. In 331 AC, the first major challenge presented itself to Donnell Bolton and Myrcella Hill, the regents of the Dreadfort. When the Bolton levy returned, weakened, from helping King Rickon defeat pretender Alice Stark, Lord Wayne Woolfield of Ramsgate, the pretender's son and Bolton rival since his vassalization by Lord Ramsey, saw an opportunity to retake his old high lordship of the Broken Branch. Together with the Lord of Hornwood, he raised his flag in rebellion. It was the start of a lengthy conflict that would fully occupy Bolton attention for years, something which was welcomed at the Manderley and Stark courts. In the chaos following the death of King Edric Baratheon of the Iron Throne, the new king Boromund Baratheon continued his war with pretender Quentyn Martell, who moved on King's Landing with the support of Dorne. But it wasn't the Martells who ended up capturing the capital. It was an outsider candidate, Bria Enderly, the Archon of Tyrosh. This associate leader had seen the chaotic state that the Crownlands were in, and had prepared and executed a swift naval invasion. To the surprise and shock of many, this foreigner would crown herself Queen of the Iron Throne, or what was left of it. Not willing to risk their lives for this rump state, the armies of Quentin Martel started to disintegrate, and he soon signed a white peace with his new queen, who was already fighting to keep her position as Archon at the Tyroshi court. Meanwhile, the rebel Lord of Hornwood had won a narrow victory over the hastily raised Bolton men at the Battle of the Dreadfort. The rebels still decided on a tactical retreat, to resupply, treat their wounded, and attempt to link up with their allies in Ramsgate. The Boltons had also retreated and were soon joined by reinforcements from White Harbour. Trying to prevent the two rebel lords from linking up, Commander Deswyn of the Bolton army, the leader of a Dreadfort-based mercenary company, decided to force his depleted troops to march on the Hornwood before the rebels could escape. It was a gamble, but it paid off. The rebels were decisively defeated, chased down, and defeated again. The Lord of Hornwood was out of the war. Next, the Bolton army marched to relieve White Harbour, which was now under siege by Lord Wayne Woolfield. The rival lord, now badly outnumbered, retreated to his castle at Ramsgate, but his army was intercepted by Commander Deswyn and slaughtered to the man, practically in front of his own gates. The rest of the war was a matter of mopping up small rebel bands all over the extensive Bolton domain. Little Lord Roose IV travelled with the army camp in those days, training with his guardian John Massey. Among the Bolton men, the lordling was affectionately known as Little Boots. When the war was over, the two rebel lords were executed. Lord Regent Donald Bolton took the castle of Ramsgate for himself, while Hornwood was granted to a Bolton loyalist. The Bolton grip on power had been strengthened significantly, but it was not absolute. After heated discussion with two badly needed loyalist ladies, Donnell and Marcella decided to grant the realm's advisory council some of the powers they had lost during the reign of Lord Roose III. Chaos among the great lords of Westeros continued. Lady Paramount Cersei Lannister of the Westerlands rebelled against her Tyroshi liege, before dying shortly after and leaving the Westerlands to her nephew Lancel. Meanwhile, King Rickon ventured to Castle Black to help his bastard half-brother Jon Snow defeat the feared King Beyond the Wall, Red Breeches' Crow Killer. In 333 AC, King Rickon also finally got his revenge on House Bolton. In a poetic mirroring of what Ramsey had done to him, King Rickon kidnapped Donnell Bolton, the Lord Regent of the Dreadfort, and threw him into the Winterfell dungeon. Donnell was interrogated and tortured by the king personally, who seemed to take some pleasure in what he did next, taking out Donnell's eyes with a hot poker. Satisfied, the king then released the blind Bolton. An eye for a hand, he had taken his revenge at last. However, perhaps the king had gone too far. In 336 AC, the sudden death of the king in the north aroused many suspicions as boy King Medgar Stark ascended. Little Lord Roose IV, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of what was going on. He had made friends with Bonifer and Mark, the children of his guardian John Massey. Together they ran around in the castle grounds and Godswood, making mischief, and trained with wooden swords and spears in the courtyard. At age 8, Lord Roose was already considered a better swordsman than many a teenage squire at court. Keeping watch in the background with his hand on his sword was Byam of Whitewood, Roose's new bodyguard, a giant of a man whose skill with the warhammer was unmatched. Roose's new regent, meanwhile, was the ruthlessly ambitious Lady Shira. Lord Roose was soon taken on as a squire by John Massey, and in this capacity he visited great melees throughout the land. The most notable of these was the Grand Melee in the name of King Medgar Stark's coronation, organized by Lady Regent Robin Flint at Flint's Finger in 336 AC. The young lordling watched every fight and idolized the finest warriors of the north, wanting to emulate men like Torrhen Wed, Donner Flint, and Hother Holt. In 337 AC, the council agreed that the new boy High Lord of White Harbour was now weak enough that it was an opportune time for a quick war to capture the Sheep's Head Hills. The Bolton realm's levies outnumbered the Rump Manderleys 4-1, and so once they had been raised, Sheepshead Hills was captured in a matter of months. Lord Roose Littleboots once again joined the army camp, now as a squire, cleaning blood off of John Massey's armor and sword and taking care of his horses. After the war, when helping Sir John with the tourney of High Point of 338 AC, Lord Roose gained a newfound confidence. He had now seen more fighting than most men twice his age, and was not afraid of it anymore. In 338 AC, in faraway Essos, Daenerys Targaryen died. Her dragons had long since dispersed. Viserion was locked in King's Landing's dragon pit, waiting for a worthy rider. Drogon was soon tamed by a certain Mokoro Kaidar, while Rhaella Targaryen, Daenerys' daughter and only child, continued to ride Rhaegal. This was not the last the world would hear of the House of the Dragon. Meanwhile, in the north, the Bolton bloodstain continued to spread out over the northern tablecloth. The next target of Bolton expansion was the county of Blackpool, in the small duchy of Oldcastle. Yet again, no significant allies dared to join the Bolton prey. The young Lord Roarch II's slate, and so the war was over in months. Another significant addition to the Bolton realm, which was starting to look more and more like the Red Kingdom of old. This strong military position was further strengthened by the marriage of Lord Roose IV to Alysanne Stark in 339 AC. The marriage between the young couple, each 14 years of age, made the little Lord of the Dreadfort the brother-in-law of boy King Medgar Stark, and was celebrated as a shrewd match by Bolton loyalists. The Stark loyalist reaction was more reserved, with some claiming late King Rickon would roll over in his grave if he knew about this match. Lord Roose IV got quite a striking figure at the altar. The young knight, for he had been knighted in the Southron tradition the year before, looked lean and muscled from the years of hard training with John Massey. Roose possessed the characteristic piercing Bolton eyes, and while the lad was still prone to the occasional voice break, it was already clear his adult voice would be commanding and authoritative. It wasn't long until young Roose also proved his worth in combat. At the local Overton melee of 340 AC, the armored lad of 15 bested fighter after fighter with his Morning Star, emerging victorious even against the famed warrior Harrion Overton, and all without a scratch on him. Roose was not so lucky in the Blue Hills melee of the next year, where he took an injury in several places and was eventually bested by Morgan Mormont. In 341 AC, the Bolton realm was shocked by the sudden death of Donnell Bolton, the blind Lord of Ramsgate. Many suspected foul play, though none were able to point to a definitive suspect, as the Lord had had many enemies. Lord Roose mourned the death of his uncle, despite their crimes against his father. Lord Donnell and Lady Shira were not replaced as regents, however. Roose IV had finally come of age. He had already cast his gaze southward once again. War was on the horizon, but first it was time for practice. As one of the first acts as the acting lord, Roose organized the first Grand Bolton melee in generations. The first few years of Lord Roose IV's reign were dominated by a series of melees that the young lord either organized or participated in. The handsome youth had turned into a brash, loud man who often offended those around him, though there were also many who were taken in by his rough charm. Those who were perhaps not charmed were nevertheless impressed. The young lord won fight after fight, breaking armor and sometimes skulls on the field with his mighty mace Icebreaker. Before the age of 20, he was already recognized as one of the best fighters in the north, and perhaps even in Westeros as a whole. Many were reminded of the stories told about old King Robert Baratheon's youth. There was a darker edge to Lord Roose's seemingly heroic tournament antics, however. Roose was after all still a Bolton, and he often flew into a rage in battle, frothing at the mouth and screaming like a lunatic. While if anything this helped his combat prowess, it also meant that he often didn't know when to stop. Thus, in the heat of battle, Lord Roose killed many a noble lord. The most tragic of these deaths, in the heat of the moment, was that of his bodyguard, Sir Byam of Whitewood. Lord Roose had grown up alongside this giant man, who had always been there in the background, and had helped him train in the courtyard of the Dreadfort. Roose could never quite match Sir Byam's technical skill at arms, but now, with his superior armor, his youthly vigor, reckless courage, and of course his mace, Roose was able to force his former bodyguard to the ground. He smashed his helmet with Icebreaker until the mace was covered in blood. When the red mist dispersed, the young lord yelled out in horror and despair. The student had beaten the master, but at what cost? Another tragic death occurred shortly afterwards. Roose's mother, the venerable Lady Myrcella Hill, who had ruled so ably and so long as regent during her son's youth, died of an unknown illness. The Lady Dowager, as she had come to be known, had remained a strong presence at court, continuing to serve her son in various council positions, and her shrewd mind and diplomatic skills would be sorely missed at court. Combined with the death of Lord Donnell of Ramsgate, Lady Myrcella's death was the end of an era. Lord Roose IV would have to go at it alone. In the south, the Tyroshi Interregnum, as this period was later called, continued in all its chaos and war. The Tyroshi Archons who set the Iron Throne succeeded each other so quickly that the maesters often just referred to them by their number. As the Riverlands were ravaged by Jakia Adaris, the sixth Archon of the Iron Throne, in an attempt to reconquer them from the Arryns of the Vale, the Baratheons returned once again. After the failure of her brother Bormund, Mynilla Baratheon now made her bid for the throne of her father, King Edric. The former Master-at-Arms of the North, Lord Roarch II Slate of Oldcastle, had always resented the forceful way in which his position had been taken and granted to Lord Roose IV Bolton. To reach an honourable conclusion, Lord Roarch and Lord Roose met each other on the duelling grounds in 345 AC, a foolhardy move by the Lord of Oldcastle, since Lord Roose's lethal combat prowess was well known. Here, too, Lord Roose smashed his rival's face in with his mace, leaving the lifeless body on the floor. This death had clearly been premeditated, since shortly afterwards Bolton forces moved to occupy Oldcastle and install a vassal of House Locke. The incident would remain a stain on Lord Roose's reputation for several years. The events of the next year would further compound this dishonorable reputation. King Medgar died in a curious incident, an explosion in an abandoned inn while traveling. His younger brother and successor, King Errol, died shortly after, falling from his balcony in Winterfell, with no witnesses. Though none could prove it, many suspected House Bolton, because after these two all-too-convenient deaths, the throne passed to Donnell Bolton, the infant son of King Medgar Stark's sister, Alysanne, and Lord Roose IV Bolton. The Boltons had done it. The Starks were no longer lords of Winterfell. Then again, neither were the Boltons, at least not yet. Lady Robin Flint, known to posterity as Robin the Regent, had served in that capacity under King Medgar for many years, and continued to rule the north in King Donnell Bolton's name. During the long reign of King Rickon, the legal power of Winterfell over its vassals had expanded. Therefore, when Lord Roose IV marched his levies on the remains of the lordship of White Harbour, Lady Regent Robin ordered him to stand down in the name of the realm's new law of internal peace. If he did not comply, he would be branded a traitor to the realm. Lord Roose IV was furious, having just won a major battle, but in the end decided that time was on the Bolton side, and acquiesced to Robin the Regent's demands. From that day, Lord Roose, already his son's Master-at-Arms, redoubled his efforts to become regent himself, and the atmosphere at the Winterfell Council meetings grew tense. South of the Neck, the chaos of the Tyroshi Interregnum continued. Despite losing every other battle, the Baratheon alliance to press the claim of Edric's daughter, Mynilla, managed to capture King's Landing, though not the sixth Argon herself. The Riverlands continued to be ravaged by war, as they had been for many years, with the Tyroshi crown still holding the upper hand, but never managing to firmly put down Vale resistance. Meanwhile, Lady Regent Robin Flint declared war on the weakened Lannisters of the Westerlands to recapture the Starks' ancestral sword of ice once more, a war she continued even after Donal Bolton ascended to the Northern Crown. Under pressure from the Lords of the Realm, Lady Regent Robin Flint of the North ended the war in the Westerlands with an honourable but ultimately inconsequential peace treaty. In the Iron Throne, too, peace arrived for the first time in a decade and a half. Lady Jakia, the Sixth Archon, defeated and imprisoned Mynilla Baratheon, while her vassal, Lord Paramount Florent Lannister of the Westerlands, would defeat an invasion by Lady Rhaella Targaryen, thus ending the threat of both pretender houses for the time being. The Sixth Archon also managed to finally crush any resistance in the Riverlands, and Lady Paramount Barbara Bracken of the Trident bent the knee to the Iron Throne once again, in 348 AC. An awkward ceremony, since Lady Barbara's husband was none other than King Orton Arryn of Mountain and Vale, her erstwhile liege. Despite the peace, the chaos of the Taroshi Interregnum had been a golden age for slave raiders from the Iron Islands and Myr. Raiders had run rampant through the Vale, the Reach and the Stormlands, taking men and women as they pleased, and even capturing prestigious castles such as the Eyrie, Highgarden and Storm's End without any clear military answer. These were dark times for the small folk of Westeros, who longed for the relatively peaceful days of good King Edric in the 310s and early 320s. Lord Roose IV Bolton, meanwhile, was forced to take a step back from court intrigue. He instead threw his boundless energy into honing his skill in melees. Lord Harrion Overton became a friend of Roose after the tense final round of a melee, even joining him as a bodyguard until he was called away to rule his ancestral seat of Overton. But only two men of any importance ever managed to best Lord Roose. The first was Lord Hellis the Terrible, the infamously cruel Lord of Ironrath. Any duel between these two epic fighters was sure to draw a huge crowd, and when it came down to a tourney in the Southron style, not Roose's speciality, Hellis managed to unhorse his opponent. Another such tourney, the largest of its kind in living memory, was hosted by Roose at the Dreadfort in 351 AC. Lord Hellis was once again victorious, and Lord Roose, who was intimately aware of the man's skills, won a handsome sum of gold in betting winnings. Even Lord Hellis' streak came to an end, however, when he was bested in 352 AC by Sir Hothor Holt, who went on to defeat Lord Roose as well. Sore but impressed, Roose immediately hired the landless noble as his new bodyguard at the Dreadfort. The court at the Dreadfort, meanwhile, saw a new rising star, Mariah Bolton, the daughter of Donal Bolton and Myrcella Hill, and half-sister to Lord Roose. Some said she was Lady Myrcella come again, and that was true when it came to skills of diplomacy and subterfuge, but Lady Mariah's real strength lay in numbers. And so when her half-brother Roose appointed her to replace the late Lord Borman Blackmire as treasurer in 351 AC, Mariah excelled. Her skills did not go unnoticed in Winterfell either, and the young King Donal was soon placed under his aunt's care. Only 17 years of age, Lady Mariah had already become one of the most influential women in the north. In 353 AC, Lord Roose sent an envoy to the free city of Qohor. This puzzled many, but Lord Roose's reasoning was sound. Ever since the capture of her parents some years before, the last free scion of House Targaryen, a girl by the name of Maegelle, had resided at the court of the Lord Magister of Qohor. The Dreadfort by now controlled a vast realm, levies to rival some kings, not to mention a treasury filled with gold. So Lord Roose was not altogether unwelcome in Essos. Palms were greased, pleasantries and presents exchanged, and in the end the Boltons got what they wanted: a betrothal between Maegelle Targaryen and Roose's second son, Rickon Bolton. This was a fabulous match for the Boltons. Not only did it leave room for claiming the weakened Iron Throne, once the Bolton hold on the north was secured, but Maegelle also rode the dragon Firestorm from the nest of mighty Drogon. If the betrothal would go through, the Boltons would become dragon riders. Only months after the Bolton delegation left Essos, word reached them of a deadly plague from a Shai. The Essos epidemic of 353-354 AC, later known as the Great Sickness, would decimate the population of the continent. But mercifully for those on Westeros, it would never cross the narrow sea. Still, disease would not spare House Bolton. In 355 AC, Sir John Massey died of an outbreak of winter fever. The Southron Lord had been Lord Roose IV's guardian and trainer during his youth, and Roose had come to consider him the father he never had. It was therefore a sad day when the news of Sir John's death arrived in the Bolton army camp beyond the wall. Lord Roose was helping the Night's Watch fight off a wildling invasion, and once he had recovered from the news, he continued cursing the poor commanding skills of the Night's Watch's new Lord Commander Royce. While the wildlings were eventually defeated, the war was far more grueling and bloody than it had any right to be. If only your Uncle John would have lived, Roose later told his wife, many good northern lives might have been saved. On the rocky island of Dragonstone, the twice-defeated royal pretender Lord Bormund Baratheon died. The Baratheon line had ended, save for one man, Bormund's grandsire, the 93-year-old Stannis Baratheon. Brother to King Robert Baratheon, who had lost his throne nearly 60 years ago, Stannis had never given up his claim that it should be his by right. Men were intimidated by the sight of Lord Stannis, who was missing an arm and a leg, was unable to walk, and always had at least one festering wound on his body. Yet, eerily, despite his ailing body, his face did not look a day over 40. Many believed Stannis had survived through sheer spite and bile, refusing to die until the throne was his. But some told a more sinister story. Stannis was a follower of R'hllor and had once claimed to be Azor Ahai come again, though the White Walkers had never come to prove this claim. And yet, the Lord had been known to offer fire sacrifice to the Red God during the War of the Five Kings. Some said he had never stopped the practice, and that it was this cruel blood magic that had kept him alive all these years. In the north, the last years of King Donald's regency saw a final bid by Lord Roose IV Bolton to become regent. Lady Regent Robin Flint had fallen out of favour at court, and the North Master at Laws, Sir Donner of House Umber, had replaced her. But Lord Roose had been vying for the regent position since before King Donald could walk. Sick of plotting and scheming, Lord Roose decided to challenge Lord Regent Donner to a duel for the regency, mirroring how his predecessor Roose III had gained the position. And Donner, honest, brave, and ruthless, accepted. But while Lord Roose had gained significant weight and lost some of his erstwhile bravado in battle, he was still one of the most well-trained and well-equipped fighters in the north. The duel was over quickly, and Lord Roose IV Bolton was finally appointed Lord Regent of the North. To his surprise, Donner was not punished, nor even removed from his position on the King's Council. Roose once again took a conciliatory and merciful stance, as he often did with his many defeated foes. As one of his final acts as Lord Regent, Roose responded to an insult by Lord Alexander Saul of White Harbour, who accused him of being a tyrant. Now free of the controlling influence of Lady Robin the Regent, Roose could use this excuse to raise his banners and march on White Harbour once more. It was a quick and easy victory, and though by any measure it was against the laws of the realm, it was over before anyone knew. The Boltons had been in charge of the city of White Harbour for decades, but could never claim to control much beyond its city walls. With the defeat of Alexander, they now controlled the entire Manderley lordship. The late 350s saw the lords of the north getting used to the new situation. For the first time in 2 decades, they now had a king who ruled in his own right. King Donnell Bolton was asserting himself as his own man, even against his powerful father. Lord Roose, no longer the most powerful man in the north, was also no longer the undefeatable champion fighter he once was, not even reaching the final rounds in the melee in honor of King Donnell's marriage. The harsh winter kept the lords in their castles for the most part, and internal wars were few and far between. Old rivalries were buried beneath the snow, and in Winterfell, Lord Roose struck up a close friendship with his erstwhile rival, Lady Robin Flint, still known as Robin the Regent. South of the neck, there was no such stability and centralization. The 7th Archon, Horaitos the Tyrant, had dragged his Westerosi vassals into the petty squabbles between the 3 daughters of Essos. The Tyroshi were trying to end the threat of Lys in a possible move to re-establish the triarchy of Lys, Myr and Tyrosh that had existed some 2.5 centuries ago. Once again, the wars were devastating, though for once Westeros was spared, and the destruction was limited to Tyrosh and Lys themselves. In fact, the Lyseni War is paradoxically remembered as a time of peace in the south. Lord Roose used this time of peace to set up alliances. His end goal was to put his new daughter-in-law, Mygelle Targaryen, on the Iron Throne. In the short term, he was also interested in taking one of the 3 sisters, the islands in the Bay of the Bight, commanding trade to Bolton-controlled White Harbour. Attempts to ingratiate himself to Lord Paramount Raymond Blackwood of the Trident were unsuccessful, and the 2 lords had a falling out after the hot-tempered Roose reacted angrily to a perceived slight. He had more success in the Iron Islands, where Lord Boromund Harlaw listened eagerly to Roose's ambitious schemes and agreed to a marriage between his daughter and Roose's son Mark. But Lady Mygelle Targaryen was not cooperating with her father-in-law's ambitious plans. Having grown up at the court of Duskendale, after her marriage to Rickon Bolton, she flew her dragon Firestorm back south again. In a letter, she explained she would accept her marriage to Rickon, but she had more faith in a Southron lord close to the capital to press her claim. Lord Roose was furious and confused. Surely Bolton might outstrip that of a minor Kingslander noble. Many agreed, and there were rumors that there was another reason for Lady Mygelle's departure. A lover, perhaps? Mark, Lord Roose IV Bolton's 3rd son, had been betrothed to Narya Harlaw, securing a marriage pact between Lord Roose and Lord Boromund Harlaw of the Iron Islands. But another, perhaps even more important betrothal took place in 363 AC, between the 4th Bolton son, Benford, and Princess Valise Ironwood of Dorne. Her father, the blind Lord Paramount of Dorne, Luwin Martell, had a keen interest in ousting the Tyroshi from Westeros, but until recently he did not have a daughter to marry to one of Roose's sons. Luckily, a marriage pact was concluded almost the moment Valise left her mother's womb. Lord Roose now enjoyed the support of 2 of the most powerful lords of Westeros, and he did not waste time. Sending a letter to Mygelle Targaryen outlining his plans, she readily returned to the Dreadfort, and ravens were sent to Pike and Sunspear, requesting all Bolton allies to raise their banners as soon as they could. The 7th Archon had lost almost all of his troops in the bloody Lyseni War, and Lord Roose would never get a better chance to press his daughter-in-law's claim. The Bolton War could begin. The brilliant Lady Mariah Bolton, steward of the Dreadfort, used all her administrative skills to fill the Bolton war chest, even knocking on the door of the Iron Bank. Othor Holt, Roose's master-at-arms, sent ravens to as many sail companies as he could find to gather ships for the invasion of Tyrosh. Lord Roose raised his banners and boarded his new fleet at Widow's Watch, setting sail for Tyrosh, where he was soon joined by the forces of Dorne and later the Iron Islands. Pretender Queen Mygelle Targaryen arrived with her husband Rickon Bolton on her dragon Firestorm, raising the morale of all of her loyal troops. Though little Tyrosh was captured, the walls of Tyrosh itself proved tough to break, and the Westerosi alliance wasn't interested in a prolonged siege. Instead, they moved on King's Landing. Much of the city had declared itself neutral in this fight, having no love for the Tyroshi. What was left of the loyalist garrison soon surrendered when the Bolton fleet arrived, and the old Targaryen banners were raised over the city once more. In fact, most of the lords of Westeros had abandoned the 7th Archon, declaring themselves neutral, with some even joining the Boltons in their war. In 366 AC, all Tyroshi loyalists on Westeros had been defeated, and with the Bolton army on his doorstep, Lord Magister Horaitos, the seventh and last Archon of the Iron Throne, besieged on all sides, decided to surrender his claim to the Iron Throne. The Tyroshi interregnum was over. Queen Majella's coronation in the Sept of Baelor, where her mother and grandfather had been crowned decades before, was the beginning of the Second Targaryen Restoration. But the coronation was rushed, and the crown lands restless and unruly. The Faith Militant, recently restored in their rights to bear arms by the Seventh Archon, had risen up against him nonetheless, and now refused to lay down their arms before their new fire-worshipping queen. Lord Roose and his allies Luwin Martell and Bormund Harlaw had to keep their armies in the field for months, fighting battles all around the Crown lands, before the Faith's rebellion was put down. The comparison to Majella's ancestor Maegor the Cruel was easily made, and this did not bode well for the young queen. Still, with the defeat of the Faith Militant uprising, Lord Roose and his allies returned home. The lords of the Westerlands, the Trident and Dorne, who had for so long enjoyed de facto independence, nevertheless immediately swore their fealty to the new Targaryen queen, hoping to thus form a front against any other would-be invaders. Majella made use of this loyalty to help out the battered Stormlands, which had been pillaged by slave raiders for many years, becoming a desolated no-man's land. She meant to reclaim the errant kingdom, and would probably not stop there. The sudden abdication of King Donal Bolton of the North came as a shock to many. Aged only 23, Donal anointed his infant son Theon as the new king in the North, and left the day-to-day business of Winterfell to his father, Lord Roose IV. Many suspected Roose of pressuring his son into abdication, so that he could once again rule as regent. Others suspected a faction of nobles who demanded the king's resignation. But the truth might simply have been that Theon did not enjoy rulership, and once he had done his duty by producing a male heir, preferred handing over the reins to his father. Certainly he did not begrudge his father for his regency. The two remained amicable, and Donal even joined Lord Roose at court in the Dreadfort. In 367 AC, Stannis Baratheon was found dead. His face was bloated and his teeth were black, and all the evidence pointed to poisoning. The old Lord of Dragonstone and former King of the Iron Throne had lived for over 100 years, and had seen his dynasty rise, fall, rise again, and then fall again. Stannis had never been a beloved figure, but his death still marked the end of an era. Meanwhile, the fury of Queen Majella Targaryen descended upon the Stormlands, and the war was soon won. Another kingdom returned to the Iron Throne, to the delight of many. But Majella's next move was not quite as popular. She sent a large force to a remote region of Essos, near pirate-infested Dagger Lake, to attack pirate lord Jacaro Rhymenose of the Golden Fields. Her reasoning for attacking this petty lord in this remote region remains unclear, but all saw the anger and hatred in her eyes when she mentioned his name. Perhaps this was a personal quarrel from her youth in nearby Qohor. Even after this odd expedition, Queen Majella did not give her armies any rest. The reconquest of the Seven Kingdoms immediately resumed, and the armies of the Iron Throne now moved into the Reach. Only months into the war, High Garden itself was successfully taken, and many members of House Florent, the royal family of the kingdom, were put into house arrest. It seems the full restoration of the Targaryen queen's ancestral lands was inevitable. But perhaps ambitious Queen Majella had overreached herself. In the northeast, the last independent Southron lord, King Harold II Arryn of Mountain and Vale, took advantage of the opportunity by declaring war on the Iron Throne, ostensibly to get rid of the Tyroshi institution of slavery. But the war ended through negotiation, with little bloodshed. Queen Majella agreed to end slavery, with little harm done. The Tyroshi interregnum had not been long enough for human trafficking to really take root in most of Westeros. Simultaneously, Lord Paramount Jaime Lannister of the Westerlands decided that despite his voluntary subjugation to Queen Majella, he did not enjoy being a vassal after all. However, the war for Lannister independence ended equally abruptly, when Queen Majella, on her way to Casterly Rock, fell off her dragon Firestorm and into the Blackwater Rush, just when some soldiers of House Westerling, a vassal of King Jaime Lannister, were scouting the area. The Queen was captured and forced to surrender to King Jaime, who was once again granted independence. She would remain in the Westerling dungeons for a long time, but her courtiers and vassals continued their war in the Reach, determined not to lose a third war. In the north, Lord Roose IV Bolton, the Queenmaker, took advantage of another golden opportunity. Following the Emancipation Treaty between the Arryns and the Targaryens, the Vale had erupted into internal warfare, with many lords attempting to curtail the power of House Arryn. Lord Roose had for more than a decade sought support for the Bolton claim on the Three Sisters, citing the conquests of his ancestor Balthazar Bolton during the infamous Stark invasions some 2,000 years ago. Many lords in the north had come to believe him, especially now that he was once again the Lord Regent. And so, Lord Roose once again rallied his forces, this time going head-to-head with a true king. The Bolton conquest of the Three Sisters would be taught at the Citadel, for maesters wishing to obtain an Iron Link, as a textbook example of a successful war of maneuver. The military skills of Lord Roose IV Bolton were well known in Westeros at this point. Lord Littleboots had been participating in military campaigns since his early childhood, and had impressed many during the Second Targaryen Restoration. Quickly assembling his army and augmenting it with mercenaries where he could, Lord Roose first moved to secure a foothold on the islands themselves, which he gained after some quick sieges. He then re-embarked his army and moved his ships up the White Knife, where he fought a pivotal battle against an army from Runestone. The numbers were about even, some 9,000 soldiers on either side, but the Boltons knew the terrain and were able to pick the battlefield through strategic forced marches, a decisive advantage as it turned out. After the victory, Roose negotiated the surrender of the remaining Runestone garrisons on Longsister, firmly securing the island for himself. A much larger army, led by the Eyrie itself, had landed on the island of Sweet Sister in the meantime. Lord Roose, knowing he was significantly outnumbered, landed on Longsister first to rest, resupply, and dig in. The secure island provided a base for his ships, which continually harassed the Vale supply lines to Sweet Sister. Roose hoped to force the Vale army to attack him in familiar and defensible territory, and he succeeded in this aim, although faster than he would have liked. The Valeman army, some 12,000 strong, moved on Longsister, confident in their superior numbers, but they were welcomed by a hail of arrows, spikes, and hastily constructed palisades. A bloody skirmish ensued on the cliffside paths, and despite being outnumbered 2-3, the Boltons drove the Vale army back into the sea, leaving more than 4,000 men dead on their shores, for 400 of their own. Roose Bolton pressed his advantage by chasing down the remainder to Sweet Sister, decisively defeating it and recapturing all castles on the island in a matter of weeks. He proceeded to do the same in Little Sister, and soon King Harold II Arryn was forced to accept the situation on the ground. He signed a treaty surrendering the three islands to House Bolton in perpetuity. Lord Roose had gained significant prestige, and trade to White Harbor flourished now that the pirate-infested islands were secure. Under Bolton rule, the northern city was starting to rival Gulltown as the primary center of trade north of the Blackwater Rush. In the south, the armies of the Iron Throne managed to win the war against the Reach, despite the absence of their queen. After 64 years of independence, Highgarden swore fealty to King's Landing once more. Queen Magella would not enjoy the victory, however. She died in the Westerling dungeons shortly afterwards. The throne now passed to her son, Aegon Targaryen, the seventh of his name. The 10-year-old boy was a Bolton in all but name. He had grown up at the Dreadfort together with King Theon of the North, and both boys had served as squires to Lord Roose IV Bolton. With the defeat of a king and the installation of another, Bolton prestige had reached new heights. King Aegon VII's reign was as tumultuous as his mother's, with seemingly every free city in Essos attempting to seize a foothold on Westeros. But Lord Roose IV Bolton thrived in the chaotic atmosphere. Having seized the three sisters earlier, he next used his extensive alliance system to attack the besieged Kingdom of the Trident. The Iron Islands, Dorne, and whatever forces the Iron Throne itself could spare, marched on the Riverlands from south and west, while the Bolton forces crossed the neck from the north. The war goal was to press the claim on the kingdom of Roose's beloved wife, Alysanne Stark, as compensation for the Northern Throne, which had passed over to her son. The reason for this sudden recklessness might have been the tumorous growth that his maester and childhood friend Bonifer Massey discovered. Knowing that at 52 years of age he would not live for much longer, Lord Roose was determined to make a final mark on Westeros and secure his legacy. The war-weary Riverlands made for easy prey, and less than a year later the war was won. Lord Roose had defeated another king, and he proclaimed his wife the Lady Paramount of the Riverlands, with the approval of his grandson Aegon VII. But perhaps defeating his third king was a step too far for Lord Roose. While defending his wife's new kingdom from the pretender Lady Barbara Bracken of Riverrun, Lord Roose fought fiercely in the Battle of God's Eye. But when it came to a duel with Lord Jaime Perron of Bramstone, the old warrior Bolton, the Queenmaker, finally met his match. In his melee days, Roose would have easily been able to best his opponent, but his tumor and old age had slowed down his sword hand, and it only took a single slip-up for Lord Jaime to pierce Lord Roose's armor, leaving him dead in the field. Roose the Red Lord had ruled as a family head for more than 50 years, and had turned House Bolton into a royal family 3 times over. His legacy would not soon be forgotten. Donald II Bolton, former king in the north, was now the new lord of the Dreadfort. A well-dressed, cowardly man with arbitrary whims, Donald II did not have the military skills of his late father, but all agreed he was not stupid, and after such a long period of stable rule under Roose, his vassals generally accepted him. He was aided in his command by his brothers Benford and Mark, superior strategists and fighters who could teach him what they knew. The 3 brothers together led the army during battles around the God's Eye and during the long siege of Riverrun. But while the war was eventually won, and his mother could stay Lady Paramount of the Riverlands, Lord Donnell, who had never desired rulership, always felt the crushing expectations left to him by his father's reputation. He needed something, anything, to rival or even surpass his Lord Father. And Donnell did have something his father never had. During his time in Winterfell, he had found a dragon egg deep in the Stark crypts. Lord Roose had been much and more, but he had never been a dragon rider. Against the advice of Maester Bonifer Massey, Lord Donnell attempted to hatch his dragon egg in a courtyard bonfire. But like many before him who attempted the same, he died in the flames. The unwilling lord had ruled for less than 2 years. That was in essence the end of the Boltons of the Dreadfort, the Red Lords as Maesters later called them. The Bolton collection of high lordships, the kingdom within a kingdom, reverted to the crown. After all, Lord Donnell's son and heir was King Theon II de Bolton, the king in the north. But their legacy would not be forgotten. The Boltons had firmly secured themselves a position as one of the most powerful families in Westeros, controlling the Trident, the North, and to an extent, the Iron Throne itself. None could now deny that they had eclipsed the Starks forever.